This is Grief and Grit, from heartache to high fives with a dash of sass. The podcast that turns the tables on traditional grief talks with a fresh, sassy spin. Listen in for candid conversations about the messy, awkward, and downright hilarious aspects of dealing with loss. Because sometimes the best way to cope is with a little laughter and a lot of grit.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
I've got my tea.
I have coffee.
Yeah, and we're ready to go. So hi everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for tuning in.
Yes.
As you know, it's Halloween season, and of course that's either a good thing or a bad thing. And this episode is for everyone. And we absolutely understand that there are people out there who don't celebrate Halloween. But I think what we're going to be discussing today is definitely relevant to everyone, whether you celebrate it or whether you don't. And, the important thing is that we're going to be discussing the mask of grief, which is a mask that we wear when we are grieving. When we're going through a loss, when we're going through a trauma, we hide it. We tend to hide it. And that's what we do in Halloween. We have kids who wear costumes, adults who wear costumes, wearing masks, hiding behind it all. Who is the real you? And I think that is, very relevant to what is real grief? What are we really feeling? So we're going to delve into that. And Greer, the mask of grief, it's complicated.
It is.
It's a definite complicated form of grief.
And for those listening, as we delve into the mask of grief, I want to say I am one of those people that wears my feelings on my sleeve. My facial expressions, I don't often have control, and you likely know what I'm thinking, and I am really bad at hiding things. But at the end of the day, as we've explored this topic, there are still masks that we wear, even though we are still our authentic selves. And for those that might be more extroverted and, we wear our heart on our sleeves, the mask is still there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the mask is there especially when, it's about suppressing. As a griever, we suppress our emotional pain. I know I've done it. I know you've done it.
Yeah.
I'm sure so many of you listening have done it, are still doing it. And as we've learned that grief is very much an ebb and a flow. There's no timetable to this. There's no quick fix.
Right.
So we do tend to mask our grief as a survival skill. Yes, albeit it's an unhealthy survival skill, as we'll delve into today. But that's what we do. Masking our grief gives us the ability to go through our day-to-day drudgery.
It does.
Keeping one foot in front of the other. When you first go through the loss, it's like, I'm never going to be able to do that.
Right.
Well, you put on a mask, and I know definitely for me, it was, I put on a mask probably when Mark took ill. I had to put on a mask. It was while he was still living. We were fighting his illness. And I had this mask that, I'm fine. I've got this. Little did I know how that mask was going to change, because we wear so many different ones.
Right.
And for me, that started when he got ill. It carried on certainly through his death, because I was, as we've spoken about, I was left with 4 small children. And what was I going to do?
Right.
I had to be that face of strength for them, getting up in the morning, getting them ready, showing them, Mom's got this, and it's, it's going to be fine, and we all good. And you learn down the line that for me and my immediate family, that was not always the best choice that I made.
Well, and I do want to say it be kind to yourself, because it's not always a choice. Like from an
Correct.
evolutionary standpoint, we have our brains protect us.
Right.
Just in the same way that our bodies protect us in different situations.
Exactly.
And so think of the mask of grief. Yes, there are different masks that we're going to talk about, but there's also almost this mask over your brain, just protecting you so that you can keep going.
Exactly.
So just something to consider.
Correct.
Yeah.
No,
And
absolutely.
it's not always a choice. It's more of a choice to take off the masks than to wear the mask.
Correct.
And it's really, really hard. And we're going to talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that was for me. I had to have my mask and I didn't dare take it off. And honestly, I mean, if I'm being honest here, 16 years down the line, and I'm just starting now to take that mask off completely.
Well, and that goes to your empty nesthood now.
Correct.
And what life was supposed to be. You're in this new chapter that is supposed to look entirely different.
Correct.
From the way it does.
Yeah. So that's how it's been for me. And I'm sure for you as well.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because, as I said, I'm not good at hiding things. I'm not good at, quote unquote, wearing the mask. What you see is what you get with me. But at the same time, there were definitely masks that I wore, and a lot of that, there are signs to look out for in terms of the masks. And one of those is physical health declining. And I had high blood pressure for the first time.
Right.
I gained a lot of weight. And it wasn't even necessarily just overeating. I've battled weight issues my entire life, but I mean, this was like no other. I had actually gotten down to my adult low before Jared died. And then all of a sudden, 3 years later, 2.5 years later, I weigh more than I've ever weighed before. And, it's absorbing those feelings. It's trying to hide them.
Correct.
And the problem changes.
Exactly. And the other one, to look for, and I know that we all go through this, is, we stop creating a meaning to life. We stop creating what it feels like to want to do something, be somewhere, create something, create whatever it is, even just putting together a dinner for friends to come over.
Right.
We lose that meaning.
It's
and
the purpose.
it's
purpose.
Correct. And it's all those things. And I know that for me, I mean, I don't know if we've spoken about it before, and I don't know for any widows who are listening, for me, cooking went out the window. I used to love it. I used to entertain, I used to cook, I used to be quite a good cook, although if you ask my children, probably not. But I lost that. So I lost that, the ability to create new meaning, which means, and if you stay, and these are just things to be aware of, that if you are feeling those things, that means your mask is so tightly on that it's scary for you.
And it's interesting because mine is actually the complete opposite. So I actually stopped cooking when I became pregnant with my son, and Jared took over. And even then, I still dread cooking, but I have since overcompensated when it comes to holidays, because I want to make sure that my kids are with their families and their friends, and to have the opportunity. And I mean, for Rosh Hashanah and for Thanksgiving of last year in 2023, I had like 50 people at my house for
Wow.
each one.
Right.
And because it was so important for me to have the kids know and make memories with Jared's side of the family.
Right.
And, so again, so that was my mask. It was
Yeah.
actually doing something that I don't enjoy by cooking and, I do enjoy entertaining, not the cooking part, but, here I'm doing that.
Yes.
And, it just was something that I needed to do. So that was my mask.
Right. Yeah. So we don't want to stay there.
Right.
And then, of course, the emotions. So, as we know, in normal day-to-day living, emotions are erratic. We all feel sad. We all feel happy. But I think it's important to be very aware of what emotions you have. And if the sadness is there constantly, if you're finding that it's hard even to smile, it's hard to laugh, it's you're just in a constant state of either irritability or anger or sadness or the loss of interest in anything,
Numbness.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Then it's important to say, okay, I need to start maybe lifting this mask a little bit. And yeah, it's scary. It feels more secure to be behind a mask and not have to confront these feelings, deal with these feelings, go through the feelings, but very important to be in touch with your feelings. I mean, just last night, I needed a good cry. I don't know why, but I just needed a good cry. And I've learned that it's fine. If I need a cry, that's obviously what my brain needs, my body needs. So I went to my go-to, which is well, I have two go-tos. It's either music, like a Broadway show, of course, or it's Steel Magnolias.
Oh my God. Yes.
So didn't feel like watching a movie. It was late. So I went to my music and I just cried and cried. And that was okay. I then fell into a deep sleep.
It's a release.
Correct.
Crying is a release.
Correct. So that's why I'm saying it's important to unmask those feelings and let yourself feel them. It's necessary to be able to move on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Otherwise, we live in limbo.
Right.
We stay in limbo and very hard to move on.
I know another one that we have both struggled with is the strong mask. And I have always been used to doing everything myself because typically when I have delegated things, it's not done the way that I want them done, especially from my personal life.
Exactly.
So asking for help is not something that I did often. And then honestly, parenting during COVID, there were limited resources to even ask for help.
Right.
So, when Jared died, I was trying to figure out this widowhood and solo parenting thing on my own. And thankfully, I did start to see the gaps and I was able to start asking for help. But even 3.5 years later, I still need a lot of help. But I'm just tired of asking for help.
Yeah.
And, I continue to try to do things myself just because it's sometimes easier, but it's really not.
It's not. It's not. And that, I think that's the biggest. I think we all feel like we have to be strong.
Right.
I think strength and being strong in any adverse situation is like your go-to word.
Right.
And
be strong for the kids. Be strong. It's
correct.
No, we don't
for
have
you.
to be.
And sometimes strength comes in weakness. Allowing yourself to ask for help. And I've been the worst with that. And I feel like I'm way too down the line 16 years later.
You're not.
I mean,
it's never too late to take off the mask.
Yeah. And, we can be weak. We can be vulnerable.
And it's interesting because it's almost like, instead of it's replacing the word strong with present. Like you don't have to be strong for X. You just have to be present for
Right,
X.
right.
And what is that natural presence? And that's what we have to show up as.
That's a really good point. And then, of course, the other one is the happy mask.
Right.
And we all wear that,
Oh,
whether you've
yes.
been through whatever your loss,
Right.
whatever your situation, we all feel like, oh, it's all fine. We put on our happy face. You know that
Mhm.
song, put on your happy face. So
Uh-huh.
there's definitely that happy mask. And yes, it is safe and it's fine
That's right.
to rip that off and show the sadness and the
Mhm.
vulnerability under there.
And so often the public mask is the happy one,
Mhm.
and then the private mask is the other not so pleasant masks because
Correct.
we save the energy and the happiness and the smiles for when we are in front of others. And I am the worst offender when it comes to this, but asking people, how are you? Just in passing, it's like there's not even time to answer the question. And it's one of the worst questions that someone can ask. And for whatever reason, I still do it. And I need to think of something else to say to express some, my
Yeah.
my excitement for running into this person or whatever.
Right.
But it's for me, I didn't want to be defined by widowhood.
Mhm.
And I wanted a happy life for my kids. And sometimes it's like you fake it till you make it, or
Correct.
it's
Yeah.
dressed for the job you
Right.
want.
Right.
So that was the mask that I did put on. And in some ways it was helpful, and in other ways it wasn't.
Mm.
But I think if you're going to do something like that, you need to be intentional so that, again, you're present.
Correct.
You know what you're doing, you're cognitive of it. And there are always ramifications for our choices. I keep telling Jack, there are natural consequences for literally every choice we make in life. There are
Exactly.
good consequences and bad. So you just have to be aware, and especially if you're fresh in your grief process, start paying attention to how your body is responding
Mhm.
to the different masks, because those are the consequences.
Yeah.
The good
Your
if you feel good,
physical.
and the bad if you're just
Yeah.
feeling like it was too much.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the busy mask. And
Mhm.
for me, that was, oh my gosh, the busier I could be, the happier. Well, I wore all the masks. I wore the happy mask because I was busy.
Mhm.
So busy is the best distraction and the
Mhm.
best mask to wear
Right.
because well, I'm too busy to think.
Yep.
So it takes you away from even thinking, even coming to that tiny little place where, oh my gosh, if I go there, I'm going to cry or I'm going to
Mhm.
feel something. So better I just carry on being busy.
Exactly.
And I think that that's for a lot of people.
I remember for me, I continued working for the first 18 months. Well, I took 2.5 months off right after it happened, but then I went back to work for a year and a half. And I was so busy that when I finally took time off, I remember saying to my therapist, like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm exhausted.
Mhm.
And she said to me, you've been in fight or flight for so long, and now
Correct.
your body's crashing.
Correct.
So you have to give your brain and body that time to rest. It hurts. It's painful, but it needs to process.
It's so necessary. It is so necessary. And then there's the disconnect mask,
Mhm.
which I think a lot of people don't realize is such a real mask. So
Mhm.
for me, the disconnect was I don't want to go there. Again, I don't want to feel the pain. I don't want to face the reality. I don't want to be involved in this. I just think it's something that happened. It's a trauma that happened. It's a loss that happened, but it's somewhere way, way over there. It's not happening in my life.
Mhm.
So it became a disconnect to literally disconnect from the reality of the grief.
Mhm.
And of course, all that does is it pushes the grief down, it pushes the grief away. But boy, that grief is going to bubble up one day, it's going to explode. And at some point in your life, you are going to have to face that grief.
Yeah. And I know for me, the disconnect, there were different ways that I definitely disconnected. But one of them that I just thought of while I was still working, I I was on calls and in meetings all day. And occasionally, if there was a break, I might try to do something to close out Jared's estate or, cancel this account. And, talking to someone and explaining, 5 times to this company that my husband died and I've already sent over the death certificate. And oh, now I need to send it again.
Yeah.
And then going through that and then jumping on the next call with Zoom with colleagues with a smile on my face and just keep going with the project.
Yeah.
I mean, there had to be a disconnect.
There's
My
a
brain,
disconnect.
I needed to be able to separate those
Correct.
to keep going.
Yeah. And I think that's what we do. But sometimes it's dangerous because you disconnect so much from the reality that at some point when that reality finally hits you, you fall apart because you can't face it, and it's like, oh my gosh, this really did happen.
Right. And in my situation, I started actually becoming resentful because perspective started to kick in.
Right.
And was that meeting really important? Did someone die? No.
Right.
Was someone dying? No. This is a small problem. It's going to be fine. It doesn't even need a meeting to solve it. But here I am on this call using this time and energy.
Right.
And, so again, it's that perspective, but the disconnected piece is really important and it's hard to identify. I think that one was one of the hardest for me to identify.
Definitely. I think that until you look at the word, it's like, oh wow, yeah, I did actually disconnect. Which brings us to the next mask, which is angry. And we all feel that for whatever loss you've been through, whether it's a job loss or a spouse or whatever loss it could be, there's that angry mask that we all wear. And we all know that. But there again, I feel like that sometimes is an important emotion to feel because, yeah, it sucks. What happened sucks, and you have every right to feel angry. It's just not a good one to keep all the time because, again, it's like not really facing it in a way that it needs to be dealt with.
And it's interesting because I know that that's a dominant mask for so many people going through the grief process, that anger. And it's infuriating that life can be so awful at times and throw us such, terrible challenges to face. It's not fair. After Jared died, I really tried to approach this without having anger. Bad things happen and it isn't fair.
Right.
And at the same time, I was trying to give my children a happy life. So how do I do that if I'm angry? But I remember, again, I love my therapist, talking to my therapist, and she told me that I haven't expressed anger. And I said, well, I don't have any. And she said, you do.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
And my anger comes out because I'm solo parenting 2 young kids.
Right.
And for those that know me, I am a planner. I anticipate every single scenario so that I have an idea of how to handle each possibility. And before we started trying to have kids, I actually told Jared that he needed to go to the doctor and have a physical to make sure that, he's good to go. We're good to have a baby.
Right.
And because I didn't want to parent alone.
Yeah.
But look, I am now parenting alone.
Yeah.
And that is where I tend to have my most frustration and also kind of transitioning into the denial mask.
Right.
After Jared died, I remember just I felt his presence after he died, and I would talk to him, and I would ask him to give me some signs, to make sure that I was making the right choices or doing the right things. And I would see
Right.
cardinals here and there after different calls that I had, maybe with the kids' doctors or teachers. And it's like I felt the nudge from him that I was
Yes.
getting like the support and keep going. But I was totally in denial that I had to do this on my own.
Right.
It
Right.
just,
Yep.
I wasn't okay with that.
Denial is a huge one.
Yeah.
We deny that this couldn't have happened.
Right.
This can't possibly be my life. And yet here I am, and here we are. And
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to deal with that?
Yeah.
And then for me,
Mm.
became the perfectionist and controlling mask. So and even I think it's so ingrained in me now that everything has a place.
Mhm.
Every file, every child has a folder, every trip has a folder, whatever is needed, insurance. My house, I cannot have any clutter around. I get rid of it. If it serves no purpose in my life, out it goes. So, and I was never really always like that, and became, because I had to. I
Mhm.
had 4 young children. I was new to this whole new world,
Mhm.
and I had to have some control. I had to know where everything is, put everything in its place. And
Yeah.
that's a mask that I don't know if that'll ever come off,
Yeah,
because I feel like it helps.
it does.
That's a mask that helps me. I don't think there's any negativity to it.
Mm-mm.
You have to be flexible.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
am. So
Mhm.
I have a plan. If the plan doesn't go exactly, that's okay.
Right.
I'm flexible. But I think it's okay. So for everyone listening, if you feel like you suddenly became organized, or you're not organized and would like to be,
Mhm.
it's not a bad thing to do, to have some control.
It's not, and I think it's kind of multi-pronged when it comes to the control. It's funny because when you were talking about like the house and the clutter, and you're describing me to a T. If the house is cluttered, my brain feels cluttered, and
Yes.
I get very dysregulated.
Yes.
That's a big word in our house. So, and I can't handle it. But I think, and you and I have also talked about our calendars,
Yes.
having control over the calendar. And
Yes.
I don't know if it's because we were young moms when we became widows, but knowing what is happening when it's supposed to happen. And to your point, what you said, we have to be flexible. Life happens. Someone gets sick, the
Right.
calendar gets
Right.
cleared for the
Sure.
weekend.
Sure.
That's fine. But knowing what and where and when helps to keep some sort of normalcy, I think,
Correct.
in my life.
Correct.
And I was always like that to an extent, but even more so now, but also because I rely on more people now.
Right.
Where if my kids need to be 2 places at one time, I have to coordinate that.
Correct.
And no one else is coordinating it.
Correct.
I'm doing it.
100%. Yep.
It's
Yep.
not, tagging Jared and saying, figure it out for me.
Sure.
I have a meeting.
Yeah.
That's not happening.
No.
So, that is a mask that I have tried to release the controlling aspect, in that bad things will continue to happen
Mhm.
that are out of my control. We just had to miss Yom Kippur services,
Right.
because my son was not
Not
feeling
feeling
well.
well. Right.
And that's life. Of all the
100%.
services to miss, that's not
Yeah.
the one I want to miss, but I did. And you know what? Was I upset or, pissed off? No, because
No.
that's life. It just,
Exactly.
the wrench is going to be thrown at different times, and we have to learn to roll with it, which is really hard. But I understand trying to control what we can. It's definitely a coping mechanism.
For sure. And I think some of it comes from not being able to control Jared's dying, Mark's
Exactly.
dying. We had no control over that.
For
So
sure.
if we can control something, then let's do it.
Yep,
Let's go for the
100%.
control.
Absolutely.
So, Greer, I think that if we have all these masks, a lot of them, like we've said, keeps us in limbo and prevents us sometimes from moving forward, leading a happy, healthy life again, because those things are possible, believe it or not. It's different, and it's different to how we imagined and how it looks. But I think if the longer we keep the masks on, and we hide everything and we hide behind our grief, the harder it is to move on to find that fulfillment.
Exactly.
So we have just some tips for, helping you take off the mask, because sometimes that mask is so firmly put on us and it becomes part of who we are. And that's always a hard thing to break away from something that is so part of who you are. And one of the things that worked for me is to find a safe place, a safe place, a safe person. It doesn't matter who it is. It can be a therapist, it can be an aunt, it can be a friend, a sibling, whoever it is who represents a safe space for you. That's important. Someone who allows you to take off your mask, allows you to cry, to laugh, to let it all out. That's for me, that was key.
Same.
And I found that in, a therapist. I found it in my mom. Those became my safe places.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more.
And then also self-care, as we've said, I think in most of our episodes, self-care is so important. And it always brings me to the airplane oxygen. If you don't put that oxygen mask on yourself first, you can't help anyone.
Yeah.
So whatever it is for you, for me, it became walking. I have my little Rosie, who at some point I will put a picture up on our website so everyone can fall in love with Rosie.
She is the best.
And so for me, it became walking. It may be knitting, joining a knitting club. It may be gardening. It may be meditating, reading, listening to music. Whatever it is that brings you some kind of self-care.
Yeah.
It's so important.
For me, it was like binge watching some really good shows.
Right.
But it was also having my nights out and like being able to not be home for bedtime routine. So being able to go out with my girlfriends or go to, a friend's house and just have an adult conversation.
Right.
As opposed to, dealing with, okay, for the 5th time, you need to brush your teeth, please.
Yeah, exactly. And those are things that are so important. And the benefits to that is really huge. And again, allow yourself to feel your emotions. Like I said, I needed a good cry last night. It was good to have that cry. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to have a reason. You don't have to think, oh, I'm having such a bad day. I had a great day yesterday. I played pickleball. I went to a friend for tea. I had a wonderful day. But it just kind of, last night, the night brought some sadness. And it's fine if you need to scream and shout and punch a pillow or, for me in the very beginning, and I think I'm crazy, but a good thing, get in your car, roll up all the windows and just scream, because no one can hear you. And you have the security of your car around you, and you just let out the screams. And that's okay. But it's very important to allow yourself, take off that mask of strength or whatever it is that you're wearing, and allow yourself, because that is so healing.
Absolutely. And another one that's really helpful, at least that I found helpful, were grief books and podcasts. There were numerous grief books that I've read. Grief is Love. The Hot Young Widows Club was a good one. And there are more that we'll be adding to the website under the resources tab. But The podcasts I think that also really helped were Anderson Cooper's Grief podcast and then Terrible Thanks for Asking by Nora McInerney. They helped normalize the feelings and experiences related to the grief that I was having. So they were validating in that I wasn't alone in these weird things. And also at the same time that grief is different for everyone.
Correct.
So really check out some really good books through Goodreads, type in grief and see what comes up.
Yes.
Same to podcasts, type in grief, see what comes up, but
Right.
obviously keep following ours.
Yes. Yes. And then also, so just, remember that, healing takes courage, and grief boundaries are blurry. Each individual needs to create their own grieving process. There's no prescription for healing from grief. It's important that you realize that there are the ebbs and the flows. And also, you know, for anyone who has children or even adults, ADHD is definitely a grief mask that comes from grieving, from any kind of trauma. They've done research and they've discovered in children that ADHD can be
Grief.
a result of grief or trauma that happened.
Right. So many of the symptoms, and this is something that I've experienced with Jack because I was needing to get him evaluated.
Right.
And I had to wait for about a year and a half after Jared died because so many of the ADHD symptoms are the same as how grief presents in children.
Right.
And it's just something to be aware of. It's
Yes.
something, definitely talk to, if you have children experiencing grief or trauma, talk to their healthcare providers, talk to doctors, psychiatrists, because I will say, and we're still on the journey, but Jack has since been diagnosed with ADHD and finding the proper medicines to best support him while he also has grief and, trauma and anxiety from losing his dad. It's been a real challenge.
Yeah.
So that is something that people, should definitely be aware of if there are children in the picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And also be aware that, some days grief will just hit you out of nowhere.
Right.
And it feels enormous. It feels all encompassing that you're drowning in it. It's hard to breathe. It's claustrophobic. And other days it will retract completely and it allows you to breathe. And, eventually, and I really mean this, and, I'm living proof of it. I know you, Greer, are, and so many people, that eventually you will see that you'll be able to start a life around the hole that's been left behind. It's there, it's always going to be there, and it's doesn't just close and go away, but you can create a new life around it.
Absolutely.
And it definitely helps by allowing yourself to take off the mask.
Yes. And you have to take off the mask. And again, because I'm going through this now with young children, taking off the mask also shows children that it's okay to feel.
Correct.
That it's okay to be present in our thoughts. And that is what we need more of in our society, especially here in the United States from a cultural perspective.
Absolutely.
We need to be more comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And it's really hard to be that change agent. But the more that you can take off the mask, the better for your brain, your heart, your physical body and being, and for those around you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for all your support. And we're going to say at this point that Grief and Grit is definitely getting out there. And so we appreciate your support, and
Very much.
keep following us and keep spreading the word to anyone who you think needs it. And you can find us on Spotify.
Yeah, Apple Podcasts. You can, and really anywhere that you listen to podcasts, we are there. And our website is griefandgritpodcast.com. And in the next few weeks, there will be something new up. So get ready.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you all so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you love what you heard, please follow Grief and Grit and share our podcast with your friends and family.